Now, second part of the question was, is a6 a thing against the Catalan? And this one definitely confused me a little bit, but what I imagine Kirk is asking is, I imagine Kirk plays the a6 Slav against knight c3, known as a Chebanenko Slav or Chameleon Slav, and is asking whether he can also just play this if white goes like g3 or if white plays like g3 in some other move order, like can you play a6 here? And this question I feel like is kind of forgetting the whole point of the the a6 Slav. So let's take a step back because I feel like the most useful thing here is to kind of like reframe the question of what black is trying to do against d4. One thing that's very important to understand in this position is that the move that black would like to play most times is bishop f5. But when white has just developed normally knight f3, knight c3, you can't go bishop f5 too early in this kind of position because you get hit with c takes d5, e takes d5, queen b3. And this has just been a problem for a very long time, and it's still a problem. White hits b7, this d5 pawn is hanging, so queen b6 does not save anything because knight takes d5 wins the pawn for white. And lo and behold, black has to make some kind of really serious concession, either losing a pawn or playing some extremely weakening move like b6, which will be very painful when white's bishop ends up on b5 with check, and black has no solidity on the light squares. So long story short, bishop f5 cannot really be safely played in this position. It's too early for the bishop to be developed, and everything else that black plays in this position is kind of designed around trying to get this bishop out, with the exception of e6. Because that's what black is trying to do. Black is trying to get the bishop out outside the pawn chain, then play e6 and develop this bishop, and everything else is kind of a concession. So e6 blocks the bishop in immediately. Some players try for g6, but the bishop on g7 is not considered as well placed as it is on this kind of main diagonal, especially when white plays e3 and just kind of blunts the bishop. And also it doesn't fully solve black's problems. Let's just put some position on the board, castles, castles. Here it's just still hard for black to complete their development because if the bishop comes out too early, it's going to get kicked and harassed, and if the knight comes out to d7, then it's blocking everything and it's not well placed on d7. So eventually black has to make some kind of concession, either taking here or playing bishop g4, giving up the two bishops, and so on. Or black can play dc4 in this position, and by the time white is able to, take back the pawn with a4, e3, bishop takes c4, by that point black is able to play bishop f5. Now, of course, there's no queen b3, and even though black gave up a little bit of the center, a lot of Slav players consider this position very, very solid. I mean, in general, this position is extremely solid as black is able to get everything developed and, yeah, fights for control over the light squares. Okay, and then you have a6, the Chameleon Slav, aka the Chebanenko Slav. And the point of this one is not just to control the b5 square. The point of this one is actually it's just like an extremely clever and useful waiting move. So this move a6 will be useful in all kinds of different structures, like if white goes for the exchange Slav, then a6 is useful. Or if white just keeps the tension, then eventually a6 will also be useful because black can play for b5 and get some queenside space. But generally this move is also helpful because black doesn't block the bishop or commit anything and still reserves the right to play bishop f5 and finally develop this bishop comfortably. And so it's actually not that easy for white to come up with a challenging move here. If white plays e3, then okay, they're blocking in their bishop. Now black can develop this guy. And we already have ideas like queen b3, rook a7, where all of a sudden black has different ways of defending the b7 pawn. Not to mention there's also b5, which becomes a lot more playable. If white doesn't block their bishop and plays something like bishop g5, well, at some point black is just going to take and hang on to this pawn, and then a6 is really useful here as well. And if white commits with something like c5 or c takes d5, well then black recaptures, this knight gets the c6 square, bishop can come out safely. Or if c5, then there's no pressure on d5, the bishop can come out safely because queen b3 is no longer any kind of double attack, right? Queen b3 has become a lot weaker. So that's always been the idea behind this a6 move, is that it's just kind of like a nice waiting move to eventually get the bishop out. Of course, there are drawbacks. You know, this move is a full tempo, and white can get maybe a nicer version of the exchange Slav, and etc. White, of course, has many ways to fight for the advantage, but that's the idea. So, you know, when it comes to the like the G3 Slav or like the Catalan type of thing, is this move a6 that useful? If you think about it, black can just play bishop f5 right here. Queen b3 is not really a problem if the knight's not on c3 yet. So this a6, it kind of loses its value, right? The whole point is that it's this like nice waiting move so you can develop the bishop, but you can develop the bishop right away. so this is where, you know, it gets me thinking. It's like a lot of people, they study the opening in terms of like moves, like which moves should I play in this position or this position. But what I think what a lot of coaches think is like, it's much more important to understand the ideas. Right? It sounds like the same thing, but it's really not. Like, understanding the ideas behind the moves is what helps you make better decisions in the opening when your opponent does something you're not familiar with, or when you don't maybe remember the theory, but you can still kind of find your footing because you understand the ideas behind what you're doing. And so it can kind of make sense to you at the board. And so it's not about just like memorizing, okay, in this position I play a6, in this position I play bishop f5. The key thing is to understand the point of what you're doing so that even if you don't remember, you can still kind of figure it out because you have that knowledge. So yeah, long story short, a6, not really a thing against the Catalan. Maybe in some very specific positions, but yeah, the a6 Slav has a very specific purpose, and here it's just kind of not needed. Like, you can just develop the bishop out to f5 right away. Queen b3 is not really a concern. You can go queen b6, and yeah, essentially black is fine.